employed at the nearby library in a small town that most individuals have probably never heard of. My life is uncomplicated, perhaps too simple for some, but it's mine. I've always been the reserved type, favoring the company of books to the noisy outside world. The library is my safe haven. It's a small old structure with creaky floors and shelves that have seen better days, but to me, it's ideal. Each day, I unlock the library doors at 8 o'clock a.m., switch on the lights, and inhale the familiar fragrance of books. It's a routine that never becomes tiresome. My parents passed away when I was young, so I was brought up by my grandmother. She was a kind woman, always urging me to read and learn. But she's gone now as well, and I'm all alone. No siblings, no close relatives, just me and my small world. Good morning, Helen. Mr. Jenkins, a regular visitor, greets me as he enters. He's an elderly man who spends his days reading history books. Good morning, Mr. Jenkins. The recent delivery of history books arrived yesterday. I've set them aside for you, I respond with a smile. Ah, you know me too well, dear, he chuckles, shuffling towards the designated shelf. The day progresses like this, with familiar faces coming and going. I assist a group of kids in finding books for their school project, suggest a romance novel to Mrs. Harrison, and direct Mr. Thompson to the science fiction section. It's a peaceful life, but I appreciate it. I find solace in the predictability, the routine. And then one day, everything shifted. The day Jack entered my life. He came in searching for a book, but I could sense he wasn't the typical library type. He seemed out of place with his sharp suit and confident walk. Can you assist me in finding a book? He inquired, his voice velvety and welcoming. Absolutely. What are you in search of? I responded, attempting to maintain my composure. It's a novel, The Great Gatsby, I believe, right? This way, I said, guiding him to the classic section. As I gave him the book, our hands brushed briefly, sending a shock through me. It was a simple touch, but it stayed in my mind. Thank you, Helen, he said, reading my name tag. I'm Jack. It's a pleasure to meet you. That brief meeting marked the start of everything. The start of a love that I thought would endure a lifetime. The start of a journey that would transport me from the tranquil life I knew into a world of turmoil and deceit. If only I had known then what I know now. Maybe things would have been different, but life doesn't come with a cautionary label, and sometimes we just have to learn the hard way. After that initial encounter, Jack started to frequent the library more often. It was peculiar considering he didn't strike me as the reading type. But every time he came in, he'd request a book suggestion and then spend a few minutes conversing with me. One day, he entered just as I was struggling with a box of newly arrived books. Need a hand with that? He offered, walking over. That would be great, thank you, I said, happy after we arranged the books on the bookshelves. So Helen, what led you to work at a library? He inquired. I shrugged. I've always adored books. They're like companions, you know? Also, it's peaceful and calm here. He chuckled. I can see that. It's like an entirely different universe. Our discussions became lengthier with each visit. I discovered that Jack was involved in his family's enterprise, something related to property. He was easy to converse with, and for the first time in a while, I felt like someone was truly interested in me. Then, one day, he startled me. Helen, would you care to dine with me tonight? He inquired, a hopeful expression in his eyes. I was surprised. Like a romantic outing? Yes, like a romantic outing, he grinned. I hesitated. This was unfamiliar territory for me, but there was something about him that made me want to agree. Okay, sure. I'd like that. We went to a small eatery in town. It wasn't extravagant, but it was comfortable. We chatted about everything and nothing, and for a few hours, I forgot about my typically solitary life. On the way home, Jack said, I had a truly wonderful time tonight, Helen. You're very distinct from the people I usually encounter. I didn't know how to reply, so I just smiled. He continued, I'd like to see you again. Would that be acceptable? I nodded. Yes, I'd like that. From that point on, we began to see each other more frequently. He'd take me out for dinner, or we'd go for strolls. It was pleasant. For once, I felt like I was part of something more part of a world that wasn't just about literature and tranquility. It wasn't long before I fell for him hard. He was captivating and attentive, and he made me feel unique. And when he proposed, I didn't hesitate. I said yes. In hindsight, I wish I had seen the indications. I wish I had known that the charisma was just a facade, a cover for something much less pleasant. But love has a way of blinding you, of making you disregard the cautionary signs. And I was very much in love, or at least I thought I was. After Jack and I got engaged, things started to change. It began with his parents. They didn't approve of me from the start. They thought I was beneath their son because I didn't come from wealth. The first time I met them, it was evident they didn't like me. We were at their residence for dinner, and I was nervous. It was a grand, extravagant house, nothing like what I was accustomed to. "Helen, this is my mother, Margaret, and my father, Richard," Jack introduced. "Pleased to meet you," I said, attempting to smile. Margaret scrutinized me. So you're the girl who works at the library?" "Yes, I am," I replied, feeling smaller by the second. "Richard," interjected Jack, "couldn't you find someone more appropriate?" I felt like crawling into a hole. The dinner was protracted and uncomfortable. They made it clear they thought I wasn't good enough for their son, but Jack stood up for me, which made me adore him even more. Before our wedding, they insisted on a prenuptial agreement. They said it was just a formality. I didn't have much to lose, so I assented without making a fuss. After we tied the knot, I relocated to Jack's residence, which was actually his parents' abode. They had bestowed it upon him as a wedding present, but they behaved as if it still belonged to them. His parents frequently came over without prior notice. They would enter and immediately start giving me orders. "Helen, prepare us some coffee," Margaret would insist as soon as she arrived. I would comply silently. I didn't want to stir up trouble. One time, Margaret gestured towards the TV and remarked, "Remember, Helen, in the event of separation, you can't lay claim to this." It was the same with everything else. They persistently reminded me that nothing in the house belonged to me. Jack began to change as well. He wasn't the man I had fallen for. He started participating in the jokes his parents made at my expense. One evening, while I was trying to decide what to wear for a family gathering, I asked Jack for his opinion. "This one makes you look less drab," he chuckled. I was wounded. It felt like he was a different person around his parents. He no longer defended me. Instead, he laughed along with them. Living in that house was draining. I felt like an outsider, an unwelcome visitor. I kept hoping things would improve, but they only deteriorated. The stress took a toll on me. I began experiencing severe stomach pains. I tried to disregard them, but one day I collapsed at the library. I woke up in the hospital. The doctor said it was stress-induced. I stayed in the hospital for a few days. Jack didn't visit. He didn't even call. I felt incredibly isolated. Then one day, a notary entered my room with news about my great-aunt's passing. To my surprise, she had left me her fortune, $30 million. I was overwhelmed and uncertain about how to handle such a large sum of money. Suddenly, I no longer felt like the impoverished girl from the library. When Jack and his parents learned about the inheritance, they visited me, showering me with smiles and kindness. "We're thrilled for you," Margaret said, her voice oozing with insincere concern. "We're family. We should be there for each other," Richard added. I was skeptical. Their sudden change in behavior seemed too drastic. After they departed, I overheard them conversing outside my room, unaware that I could hear them. "She's so naive. Can you believe our luck?" Jack chuckled. "We need to ensure she doesn't leave you, Jack. Perhaps you should have a child with her. That will keep her tied down," Margaret suggested. I felt nauseous. It became apparent that these individuals were not genuinely concerned about me. They were only interested in my money. At that moment, I realized what I needed to do. I had to leave that house and distance myself from these people. I had to take charge of my own life. I refused to be their victim any longer. Leaving the hospital, I had a clear plan in mind. As I arrived home, Jack and his parents were waiting for me, feigning concern and pretending to be the caring family they had never been. "Oh, Helen, we were so worried about you," Margaret exclaimed. I nodded without saying much. I needed to act normal and not give anything away. Jack approached me. "So when do you receive the inheritance?" he inquired, a little too eagerly. I gazed at him, the man I believed I adored, and realized I didn't even recognize him anymore. "Soon," I replied, "but it's not something you need to fret about." His smile wavered slightly. "But we're married, Helen. What's yours is mine, right?" I forced a smile. "Certainly, darling." That night I couldn't sleep. Their voices reverberated in my mind, their insincere concern, their avarice. It made me ill. I got up and began writing. I documented everything they had done, everything they had said. It was like a dam had burst, and years of suppressed frustration and pain poured out. The following morning, I had a meeting with a lawyer. I elucidated everything, showed him the prenuptial agreement. He was astonished, but said the agreement would safeguard me. "You're doing the right thing," he assured me. When I returned, I found Jack and his parents in the living room. They looked up as I entered. "There she is, our courageous girl," Richard said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I sat down, clutching my purse. "I have something to express." They all looked at me, inquisitive. "I'm filing for divorce," I stated, my voice unwavering. The room fell silent. Then Margaret erupted. "What? You ungrateful little..." Jack was on his feet. "Helen, you can't be serious. We love you." "Do you, Jack?" "Because I don't feel loved. I feel used." Margaret was fuming. "We'll sue you. We'll take half of your inheritance." I reached into my purse and pulled out a copy of the prenuptial agreement. "Actually, you can't. This states neither of us can assert the other's belongings in the event of separation." They fell silent. For the initial time, I sensed in command. I rose. "I am departing. I do not desire any of you to get in touch with me." I departed from that residence, their yells and abuses following me. It was the most challenging thing I had ever done. But as I drove away, I felt a burden lift off my shoulders. I was liberated, free from their scorn, their control. For the first time in a lengthy period, I felt like I could inhale. I did not know what the future held, but I knew it had to be superior to the past. I leased a small apartment in the urban area. It was nothing extravagant, but it was mine. For the initial time in years, I felt a sense of tranquility. I was still coping with the divorce, but I felt like I could manage it. One day, I received a call from the attorney. "Helen, there is something you should be aware of regarding your great-aunt's will." I was perplexed. "What about it?" "There is a requirement. You need to utilize a portion of your inheritance for a benevolent cause. It was your great-aunt's final desire." I was taken aback. I had no clue. She was quite the humanitarian. It appears she wanted to pass that on to you. I hung up the phone, lost in contemplation. My great-aunt had given me an opportunity to do something good. It felt like a sign, a nudge in a new direction. I commenced investigating charities and causes. I wanted to do something significant, something that would make an impact. That is when I stumbled upon a small organization that aided women who were victims of intimate partner violence. It resonated with me. I reached out to them and arranged a meeting. The woman I encountered, Linda, was enthusiastic and committed. "We offer refuge, lawful assistance, and therapy to women who have no other options," Linda explained. I listened, touched by the accounts she shared. "I want to support," I said, sensing a purpose I hadn't experienced in years. With Linda's direction, I utilized a portion of the inheritance to finance a new refuge. It was an amazing sensation, knowing I was aiding other women in finding an escape, just like I had. A few weeks later, Linda asked me to attend the inauguration of the refuge. It was a small gathering, but the ambience was brimming with hope and appreciation. As people socialized, I noticed a familiar face in the crowd. Sarah, a former co-worker from the library. "Helen, is that you?" she inquired, taken aback. "Sarah, it's been so long," I said, embracing her. "What are you doing here?" she asked. I informed her about the refuge, about my participation. She listened, her eyes wide. "That's remarkable, Helen. I had no idea." "It's a new phase for me," I said, grinning. We spent the evening catching up. It felt good to reconnect with an old acquaintance. It felt like fragments of my life were gradually falling back into place. As the event concluded, Linda approached. "Helen, I can't thank you enough. This refuge will transform lives." I glanced at the faces of the women who now had a secure place to go. "It's the least I could do," I said, feeling a warmth in my heart that I hadn't experienced in a while. A very lengthy period. The days began to merge into one another, each filled with the gratifying work at the shelter. I was discovering a new sense of purpose, something that was truly mine. Then, unexpectedly, my phone rang. It was a number I hadn't seen in a while, Jack. My heart raced with a mix of emotions, but curiosity prevailed. "Greetings, Jack," I said, my voice steady. "Helen, I need to speak with you. Can we meet? It's urgent." His voice sounded desperate. Reluctantly, I agreed to meet him at a public coffee shop, hoping that being in a familiar place would give me strength. Sitting across from Jack, he looked different, defeated, almost pitiful. His eyes were pleading. "Helen, I made a colossal mistake. I want you back. I've realized how much you mean to me," he blurted out. I looked at him, feeling nothing but disdain. "Why now, Jack?" He sighed. "My parents, they controlled everything. They were the reason our marriage failed. I was weak, but I'm different now." I felt a surge of anger. "You blame your parents? You stood by while they treated me like dirt. You laughed with them." He reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "Please, Helen, I know I was wrong. I've changed." I stared at him, seeing the man I once loved, but now felt nothing for. Changed or not, it's too late. "I feel nothing for you, Jack. Nothing but disdain." His face fell, and for a moment, I saw a glimpse of the man I married, but it was fleeting. "I'm sorry, Jack. I've moved on. I have a life now, a purpose. There's no place for you in it," I stated resolutely. He nodded slowly, a look of acceptance on his face. "I comprehend. I just had to attempt." Leaving the coffee shop, I felt a burden lift off my shoulders. It was concluded, truly concluded. The following day, there was an occasion at the shelter. A local artist had contributed a sculpture, and it was to be revealed in the garden. As I stood there encircled by individuals who supported and believed in me, I felt a feeling of fitting in. Sarah, my former colleague from the library, stood beside me. "You've accomplished something remarkable here, Helen." I smiled. "We did it, and there's so much more to do." As the occasion continued, I felt a sense of achievement and intention. This was my life now, and I was precisely where I was meant to be.